governments, they also have to make payments for the management of biodiversity.
More support for when common grazings are wanting to apply for things like environmental management, because there's extra paperwork involved with being a common grazings for doing an EECS plan. For example, in the guidance, you have to get the written consent of the majority of the shareholders within the common grazings to agree to the plan and also to agree to how the monies are divvied up. And then what you need to do is the clerk needs to have this letter going out to everyone with the guidance notes, and then a form a bit like this would need to be filled in with each of the names of the shareholders and to get them to all sign and explain what size of shares they have. So this is all extra paperwork and bureaucracy that is part of this EECS application for common grazings only, but there's no actual extra grant support for common grazings compared to a similar sized hill farm, which is much simpler because you're only dealing with maybe one grazier. So it does become a much more complex, and that tends to be a limiting factor to people wanting to start to even think about applying for agri-environment. It's a voluntary post, and sometimes the extra paperwork and burden that's required is maybe part of the reason why a lot of committees aren't in office as it used to be.
The main thing of standing in the way is getting the group together initially and then coming up with the funds to apply for an application.
Some common grazings have got extra layers of complexity that not even every common grazings has. For example, the large number of shares, because they're not common grazings, they're general grazings. So the villages themselves have their own common grazings, and then several villages have combined use of that larger general grazings. That's an administratively complex issue. And then on top of that, because they have large areas within the Trotternish Ridge, SAC and SSI, that's environmentally complex to deal with. And at the moment, these shareholders, despite working in very difficult ground that is designated, get absolutely no financial reward for that because of the complexity of trying to work out what the right grazing levels are for the mosaic of the different habitats that are in that grazings.
If grazing was removed from the Trotternish Ridge, that is actually as bad as overgrazing. If there was no grazing, one or two dominant plant species would outcompete all the other plant species, and you'd end up with a very poor grassland, only with a few species present.
The other big challenge is to decide what the actual habitat condition of the ground is. For the shareholders to decide whether it was a good idea to go into an agri-environment scheme, first of all, the ground would need to be audited, and if it is designated, there would need to be reference made to the site condition monitoring and whether the site was seen to be favourable or unfavourable condition.
Site condition monitoring or common standards monitoring is a requirement by the government for us to monitor the condition of the SSSIs, Sites of Special Scientific Interest, and for each habitat in the UK they've got a set of criteria.
You have a very simple set of rules that a feature, as it's called, has to pass before you can declare it in good health, in good condition.
So this here is my most species-rich plot yet. It's had 42 species in it. The vegetation is very, very short, and one of the criteria is that at least 25% of it should be over 5 centimetres tall. And I don't think that's happening here.
So it fails on the height, but arguably it take a lot to grow tall in this kind of habitat. Two of the acid grassland sites failed the site condition monitoring, and two of them passed. However, the two that passed I consider much more dull and much more less worth, less biodiversity value than the two that failed. And I think this is a problem with site condition monitoring generally. It's not flexible enough to deal with different localities very easily. So the ones higher up are always going to be shorter because of the effects of climate. So when you're using site condition monitoring, you've got to remind yourself that it's not a be-all and end-all. You've got to take the results and then interpret them afterwards.
So the problem is that whilst we've decided that sheep are important, nobody's decided whether the sheep grazing is correct or it needs to be modified. But whilst that uncertainty continues, the common graziers can't actually decide whether or not to take part in the environmental scheme. There's an impasse.
If they get an agent in, then there's the financial cost of the agent, and there needs to be, for these complex sites, there needs to be a wee bit more clarity beforehand, before people waste all that time and energy.
What might happen, and my big fear, is that if over time it doesn't make sense from all the other points of view to keep sheep there, and there's not any support for the environmental management that the sheep are there, that the sheep will just come off the ground. And once you've taken sheep off that ground, you've lost the unique culture, you've lost the animals' own knowledge about the ground and their hefts, and since it's thought that sheep are an important part for maintaining these Europeanly important habitats, that means that you've lost your only grazing and biodiversity tool that you have. So that's why I think that the pressure's on to actually try and get the shareholders supported for the work that they're doing, because it will not be easily or cheaply replaced once it's gone.